To discuss these issues, as well as to take a look ahead to the upcoming parliamentary year, we're joined by Liberal MP Jason Falinski. Jason, thanks for your time.
Nick, Miriam, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Maybe if we start off with this extraordinary situation in the United States, what's your reaction to the US President essentially closing the door to refugees and sometimes even Australian citizens who might hold dual residency?
Dual residency, yeah, it's an extraordinary situation. He obviously feels that this is something he needs to do to protect the United States, but that's really a decision for the United States. In terms of what it means for Australia, I'm told that the executive order that he's issued actually is helpful for us in terms of our refugee swap plan that we negotiated with the Obama administration. So we'll just have to see what the impact of this change in policy is.
Do you really still have any hope that that's going to go ahead, though? Because, I mean, the messages that he is sending with these sorts of moves, can you imagine he would then say, yes, I'll take your refugee?
So during the week I had the opportunity to speak to Ken Allen, who was Consul General in New York from 89 to 95, and he got to know Donald Trump quite well during that period. And he said the two things you need to understand about Donald Trump is that he's a New York property developer first and foremost. So one of the things that he will do is he will negotiate by trying to knock you off balance, knock your opponent off balance. I think we have to deal with this particular president sensibly and reasonably, and actually watch what's happening underneath the surface and not necessarily react to some of the things that he's doing. I mean, the other thing is that he's a reality TV producer, or was, so he knows the sort of buttons to push to get a reaction from your good selves.
But this is real life, isn't it? And these are real people's lives. And we've got a situation where people who, may not have done anything wrong in those countries are being barred simply for, being born there. We've got Australians. I guess as an Australian politician, what do you think about an Australian citizen being treated like that by virtue of the dual citizenship?
Dual citizenship. Yeah, look, that's really unfortunate that that's happened. And obviously the Australian government, where there will be or might be some detrimental effect, will make representations to the United States government to try and alleviate that or remove that particular problem that's been created. Look, it's not something that the Australian government is contemplating or has even thought about. So once again, these are issues for the United States government. It's a government that we have very good relationships with and have had for quite some time, and not just at the White House level, throughout the congressional level as well. So.
Well, you talk about how Donald Trump has become to be known by people who you've spoken to recently, and the tactics that he's employed in his previous career, and that may have served him well. But I mean, there are genuine concerns that this action in particular will be seen as incredibly provocative, and may in fact, provoke action from those groups which he's seeking to see shut down. I'm talking about groups like Islamic State. And would not it be the case that if Australia maintains that close relationship with America, the United States, that we may in fact see ourselves copying some fallout from that?
Well, no, I don't think so. But we can speculate here for a very long time about what may or may not happen. We would obviously adjust policies, or the Australian government would obviously adjust its policies to make Australians safer and to protect our national interests. But at the moment, for well over a century, our national interest has been served by having a close relationship with the United States and with its government. And I don't see at this point that there's much need for us to change that. Ultimately, these decisions are taken by Cabinet and the Parliament, but I think we just need to wait and see at the moment.
It can't give you much confidence, though, can it, when it comes to the refugee deal, when you see news like we're seeing this morning, that there's any hope of Malcolm Turnbull actually being able to seal the deal? Yeah,
so my understanding is the executive order, which is S5E, I only found out about it this morning. I haven't had a chance to read it in its full glory, but my understanding is that it has a carve-out for that, for deals like the one that were arranged under the Obama administration.
And we understand that potentially that was added specifically for that purpose. So does that give you some confidence?
Well, not me specifically, but the Prime Minister, it has given him and Julie Bishop some confidence, and Peter Dutton for that matter, that the deal will therefore still go forward because of the specificity of that part in the executive order.
What will it mean though should that deal be found to no longer exist?
Well, then that's a really disappointing outcome, because we have people at the moment stuck in Manus Island and other detention centres that are offshore. The primary objective of the government is to give those people an opportunity to get on with their lives in the United States without rewarding people smugglers who promise them a place in Australia. And obviously we've done some swaps with the United States to take out the incentive for that trade in humanity that existed prior to that deal being struck. So that would be a very disappointing outcome, but it would leave us where we are at the moment. So, yeah.
Well, let's move on to another issue. Housing affordability has been a big one this week, as it is almost every other week.
Yes.
You're from Sydney, one of the most
Yes.
unaffordable cities in the world.
Second most unaffordable.
So not.
We're working on becoming one.
Yeah, well, not a great title, is it? So what's the government going to do about it? And shouldn't we be looking at tax arrangements to try to bring some of that pressure down on prices?
Sure, we should be looking at everything that we can. I think the important thing for people to remember is that in Sydney in particular, but right across most major cities in Australia, this wasn't a problem that just happened. It was, Nick, as you know, it was 16 years in the making under the Carr government, who said, look, we're closed for business, we don't want any more people to come. So we had a major deficit in housing starts and housing supply. And more importantly, we had they made plenty of announcements in terms of transport infrastructure, but didn't start anything. People don't talk about being 22 kilometres from the city. No. They talk about being 30 minutes from the city.
But housing starts are now at a record. They've never been higher in Sydney.
Yes, that's right.
We're building more houses than we ever have. Yet
it's
prices
fantastic.
aren't. Well, it is good maybe, but prices aren't coming down, are they? So are we going to look at tax arrangements, and should we be looking at negative gearing to try to reduce some of that?
So specifically on what you just said, yes, housing starts are at a record high. We want to get to housing finishes being at a record high, and we're not there yet. You can't have 16 years of it. Took 16 years to create this problem. We've had 5 to 6 years to solve it. We're on the way to doing that. We have $100 billion worth of transport infrastructure underway in New South Wales. It takes a long time to get these things done. On the tax question, which I know is what you want to talk about, the removal of negative gearing would just make the situation worse. So if you want to make the situation worse, get rid of negative gearing. Normally my good friend David Shoebridge is on the other side telling me I'm wrong. Miriam has had to break us up on several occasions. But it just makes...
Why will it make it worse?
Because ultimately markets come down to, and the housing market is more complex, but fundamentally at the bottom of it you have demand and supply. Supply of housing is driven by the amount of capital that is available to build that housing. Negative gearing allows two things. It encourages people to invest in housing, and secondly, with people who are renting, people are able to offset their rental losses against their income, which means that rents are lower.
But we are building more houses though, so isn't negative gearing creating a market? Isn't it distorting the market and creating more demand for properties from investors rather than first home buyers?
But in a way that's not a bad thing, because what that does is that puts money into the market that allows people to build more houses, so it increases supply. And as I said before, housing starts are a good thing because that's how you get to housing finishes, but that's where we need to be, and we're not there yet.
But we also have an issue with rental as well. I mean, those prices are becoming unaffordable for a lot of people. Interestingly
though, rents, in particularly closer to cities, where in particularly in Sydney as an example, but also in Melbourne and lesser so in Brisbane, there has been a major increase in supply of rents, and we have seen rents very moderate growth in rents close to the city, and that's a supply issue which has been driven by investor demand for properties, for investment in properties close to the city.
Do you think, though, given that we've heard that this is an issue that's coming also from within the coalition, certain members within the coalition, that this will prove to be an ongoing headache for the Treasurer and also the Prime Minister as we continue, because this is not a problem that's going away anytime soon.
Yeah, no. And that's why Nick keeps asking me about it. But the point is that it will go away over time as those housing starts lead into houses coming onto the market, and also as transport infrastructure in the major cities begins to be finished as well, then you'll start to see prices moderate. And we need to be clear, what we're talking about is prices going down, and that means for people who have just bought their house and people who own their houses as well. That's what housing affordability means.
Now, just quickly too, Jason, of course, Australia Day on Thursday, a big celebration for many Australians, but not a happy one for a lot of Australians as well. Do you think do you feel a sense of momentum about potentially moving the date from one that's less hurtful to Indigenous Australians in particular?
Well, look, absolutely. The Prime Minister said during the week that that's not something we're considering, moving Australia Day, but that Australia Day starts with an acknowledgement of country and ends with a celebration of multicultural Australia. When I go around my community, I'm not feeling a great deal of momentum behind wanting to change the date, but what I am finding a lot of support for is the ongoing journey of reconciliation. The next step that this government wants to take in that is the recognition of Indigenous Australians in the Constitution.
Well, Jason Falinski, we will have to leave it there. We could talk all day, I'm sure. There's plenty more out there, but we will enjoy having your company again soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nick.